Lunch with Brad. You know you love it. Lunch with Brad. My high production budget. We are back on another episode of Lunch with Brad. I am your host, Brad. And this is my bi-weekly podcast where we talk web, tech, anything in between, and anything I really feel like talking about. So this week I have two very special guests that I'm excited about. And in honor of my company, which is Web Dev Studios, celebrating our 10-year anniversary, I thought it was a good idea and extremely relevant to bring on a couple of my friends that are also founders that have gone down the path of launching startups, very successful startups, and have run those startups over a number of years, and kind of talk about where we started, our struggles, our successes, lessons learned, and just really have an open and honest conversation about what it means to start and run and grow a company, especially in this day and age on the internet. So without further ado, let's just dive right into it. I have Corey Miller and Jason Cohen. So Corey, why don't you tell everyone quickly who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Corey. So I started iThemes in 2008, and so went 10 years, just like Brad and I think Jason. We started out doing WordPress themes. Premium WordPress themes was what it was called at the time. I think now you never say premium for anything in WordPress, but quickly got into plugins. Our hit plugin kind of that's really helped sustain our growth over the last 10 years has been BackupBuddy. Now we have iThemes Security and iThemes Sync and a team of about 22. We have an office in Oklahoma City and remote people, half in the office in Oklahoma City and half in United States and Europe. And I'm a dad and a husband. I've got two kids, 5 and 3, Callaway and Lillian, and an awesome wife who actually works in WordPress and now is a coworker with me at Liquid Web, who acquired iThemes in January.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. And we also have Jason Cohen at WP Engine. Jason, why don't you tell everyone who you are?
Sure. So I started WP Engine in 2010. We're now the largest managed WordPress hosting company. We have about 80,000 customers and 500 employees. Before WP Engine, and that was 10, so we're about 8 years old, a little bit younger. Not to the double digits quite yet, but still with some age. Before that, a startup called Smart Bear, which was peer code review tools. So developers reviewing each other's work. Now code review is, of course, very common, but back then it wasn't. So we invented the modern way to do that. I wrote a book about it. We had software and so forth. That was a bootstrap company, sold that in 2007, started it in 2002. And it's still going, actually, which is nice because now that's about whatever it is, 15, 16 years old. It was just sold again recently for $450 million, which is great, except I sold it 10 years ago when it wasn't worth that much.
Wow.
But
Awesome.
it's still nice to see your stuff live, right? It's just nice to see that it exists and still useful. And before that, a startup called IT Watchdogs, which was server room climate monitoring. So it was physical devices. If it gets too hot, humidity level, light level, door opens, eventually power monitoring. We could do things like show you the status and graphs on an embedded web thing, which in the late 90s and early 2000s was fancy. Again, that's no longer surprising, but it was surprising then. And we could page you, yes, page, without Twilio, if there was a problem. And we sold that company in 2005.
Not dating yourself at all with these technologies. So
Right.
it is funny to talk about that, but, I'm really excited to have you both on, not only because, you have amazing, histories around startups and entrepreneurship. But, I mentioned it briefly at the beginning, we're in the same industry, which is primarily WordPress, but different parts of that industry. So my company, Web Dev Studios, we're client services. We're essentially building websites and web experiences using WordPress. Corey, you're more on the product side of the house with the various, you mentioned Backup Buddy and your security plugins, and obviously Themes, where you really started, being named iThemes. That makes sense. So the product side of the house, and then Jason, being on the hosting side and building the largest, WordPress managed host. So I think that's cool because same industry, but different kind of facets. So it'll be interesting to hear how our experiences have differed or maybe not have differed. But I kind of want to start back at the beginning because I think one topic that sometimes isn't touched on much when you talk to founders and, people who've kind of built and grow startups is why we wanted to do what we did, right? Like, where did that entrepreneurship come from? And I kind of want to hear from both of you. I'm curious, does it run in the family? Like, do you have, uncles and parents and grandparents that had their own company and it's kind of in your blood? Did you have a certain mentor growing up, maybe a teacher or a professor in school? But I'm really curious to hear, like, at what point did you kind of identify that, I do want to run my own company. I don't just want to work for someone my whole life. I need to do something beyond that. Corey, maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah. So, it does run in the family for me. My two grandfathers both ran family businesses. They're very eclectic types. One ran a motorcycle dealership in Southern Oklahoma for 47 years.
Wow.
He sold his business, ironically, a month after I sold iThemes. And so I told him, like, I beat you to the punch, Papa. But he had an incredible track record, 47 years just with that business. And then prior to that, he had a fencing company. And so kind of a serial entrepreneur. What's funny about him, though, if you ask him what he's most proud about is his law enforcement career. He was a sheriff's deputy in Los Angeles for a number of years during some pretty incredible times out there. And then my other grandfather had a wholesale bait shop. So I
like bait tackle? Okay.
Minnows, like,
wow.
Goldfish, Israelis, the different types of fish that you might go fishing with, and worms, of course. So I worked in both those businesses when I was a teenager. I delivered minnows on Saturdays with my dad in the wholesale bait business. And I worked for my grandfather and uncles in the motorcycle business for a couple summers. And that was probably the inspiration. I remember telling my grandfather, one of my grandfathers on the motorcycle business, I said, "Hey, I want to run a business someday." And he goes, Corey, go get a job and get a pension. And I was like, okay, thank you for that inspiration. But his logos are in my office here from his various businesses. I'm very proud of the lineage, even though he would first say he's a police officer, law enforcement career, but really he's been an entrepreneur for the bulk of his life.
And growing up, did you see kind of the running the business side of the house, or were you purely just, an employee in a sense? Were you actually seeing some of the behind the scenes, work that went into actually running and maintaining those businesses?
Yeah. So incredibly, both grandfathers employed, I think, at points in their businesses, every single one of their kids. They both had 4 kids each, and they both worked in the business. Mm-hmm. And so I did see it all, mostly the working with family aspect of my uncle was a tireless slave driver. He would let me sit down. I'd say, "What do you want me to do, Papa, today?" And he goes, sit right there. I'm like, "What? You're gonna what?" My uncle would come back around and get off your butt, go do parts, go do this. So I saw a lot of it. I wouldn't say the financial, the accounting aspects, but all the selling a motorcycle, selling the bait to a bait shop, and seeing the cash go into this little cigar box and that kind of stuff. And it was really neat because they were able to carve out really incredible lives for their entire families for a long time. And I wanted that. I wanted something where people I loved and cared about we could work together and do something special together. Even though I didn't want to do either one of those businesses, and somehow fell into tech, 20 years later.
Didn't want to take over the bait empire, huh? That's no, that's great. And Jason, what about you? Like, at what point did that spark, kind of happen for you and say, this is what I want to do. I want to run my own company.
Yeah, I had the opposite story. It doesn't run in my family, which I think is actually kind of the point, is that I think, a lot of times people are like, what's common with successful entrepreneurs, and what are the tips that always work? And actually, the answer is there isn't, because for anyone that's where they did X and they were super successful, there's someone who did exactly the opposite of X who was super successful. And so it's one of those, like, you got to find what works for you and your
perfect formula, right?
It makes sense for your customers and your goals. What are you trying to do ultimately with the business? So I think there's contradictory things. Things are inconsistent you could do. Like, in other words, I have this goal, but instead of doing things to optimize that goal, I'm going to do things to optimize a different goal. That's probably wrong, but that everything else can work. So my parents were teachers, both of them, one at the university here and one in the school district. And so they, while supportive, didn't understand why I wanted to do this or what that meant or whatever. And right. And so I don't know why I started it. I think it's probably is in the DNA, whether or not you can trace back to another person, it's still just there. And it's probably because I'm stubborn and I think I'm right all the time, and all that usual ego stuff. And I think entrepreneurs have to be like that at least a bit, because it takes some kind of hubris to say, what the world needs? Me and my ideas. That's what it's missing. Like you sort of have to have a little bit of that as a good thing, a good initiative and belief that, like, you can do something that's good, whatever that is. And that your taste or your ideas for that are good enough that other people might agree. So I think that's okay. That's the positive manifestation of that impulse. And then, of course, there's negative ones, lots of negative ones too. So I think the impulse is okay as long as you sort of keep on the constructive side of that. But yeah, it was just always there. And why did I start the second one, the third one? The same reason, because it just happened, and can't imagine just having a real job or anything like that. But
you got a taste of it, right? And you want to keep going down that path. I mean, it's obviously was successful. I mean, if you
I don't know, because it's not fun. Like running a company isn't fun. It's almost all toil and pain. So I don't know that like you want more of the taste of it.
So get out there and do it, kids.
Well, yeah, it really is. It's bad. And so, so therefore there must be some much bigger overriding reason. Compulsion, like maybe it's the ego and adulation of being the founder. Maybe it's just the ability to create something and see it go out there, and it is fun when customers like it. That is a good feeling. So I mean, there's these things that maybe it's almost like a drug addict where, like, most of it's terrible, but every once in a while you get like a good hit, and that's enough. Like, it's probably more like that. And in fact, it is like that, because that first sale you ever make is so good. After that, it's never quite as good.
Sales never quite as good. Yeah, I mean, you get that taste, and and it validates that what you believed in is going to work, right? At least in the sense of that first sale. Like, it must have worked, or you wouldn't have made that sale. So I think having that validation.
That's what we tell ourselves. We say, "See, I was right," just because one person bought it once.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's great. That, for me, it does run in my family. Similar to you, Corey, both my grandparents had their own businesses. My mother's dad was a plumber. He actually started a company during the Great Depression and made it extremely successful and did very, very well for himself in the plumbing industry. He actually has a few patents out there for some various plumbing fixtures that we had no idea until he passed away, and we found these patents, buried in a stack of stuff. We're like, what are these? And my dad's father owned a produce company. And, back when in the early days of fast food, all the local produce was sourced, or all the produce was sourced locally. So the lettuce, the tomatoes, the onions, that all came from a local produce company, near the city where those places were at. Now, obviously they ship it in on semis or whatever, but so he, provided the Wendy's and the McDonald's and all the early fast food places with their produce. So for me, I think it does kind of run in my blood. I think from an early age, I knew that I wanted to do more than just work for someone and collect a paycheck. I wanted to have more of an impact than that. So I think that kind of set me off. Now, I didn't work for either one of them. But I knew I knew the history of it and what they had worked on. So I always kind of felt like I had that deep down inside of me, like it was just there and it was always going to be there. So, so kind of, rolling into getting the business going, I think the biggest question is like, well, what are you going to do? And then making that leap, making that leap of faith that I am, I'm not just going to dip my toe in or tiptoe around it. Like I'm diving in, and this is, I'm diving in to make this work. At what point, did we come to that point of inspiration of this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going in it, and I'm going to make it work? Is there kind of did you stumble into it? Was there a single point where you can identify and say, yep, I'm doing it, and it's going to start on this day or whatever? But at what point of starting the business did that come to fruition?
Yeah, for me, I think I had the desire seeing my grandfathers and what they had and were able to create. But I think I stumbled into my existing one. I had a website in the late 90s that I would I was writing a humor column for a newspaper, and I would post it there, and then I'd email it to people. But it wasn't until, thinking back about Jason's background, I'm like, man, I was just like a newbie understanding what www. Meant. He was creating all these incredible technologies. But 12 years ago or so, I wanted to learn more about the web and just started a blog around my particular profession at the time. And it was a learning thing. And I've been really reflecting back on that in the last couple of months with our acquisition and our 10-year anniversary. What were some of those key things that happened, and just wanting to learn, and really I wanted to do my first theme because I wanted to change it on my blog, be able to have control, not use somebody else's. And I put my first theme out, and I got this incredible response, which people were hitting my contact form saying, will you build a website for me? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just trying to learn, and I'd say, sure. And they'd ask how much. And I was like, I have no idea. I was doing freelance writing at the time, though, and that was parlayed off my previous career. But so I was moonlighting. I ended up kind of moonlighting as a freelancer. And then that whole desire kind of relit of what if I could make this something full time? I'd worked for a number of people. Like I had a job up until that point. My average tenure at a job was about 2 years, and then I'd start the next job. And I just wanted something new and learning new things and growing. And I had some success with the freelancing business and realized I was pretty lame at it. Even though I was learning and growing, I was still like, I knew I couldn't start a full-time design business by myself, and would test a number of things during that time. What if we could do, hosting, I was thinking about hosting. However, I was like, I had no idea what that meant. Eventually saw some people doing theme stuff, started doing theme stuff. I even did tutorials, anything that I could make money off of that wasn't just my skill set, because I'm not a developer. I was a very lame at one point front-end developer. I wouldn't ever call myself that today, not even close. So for me, I think it was just this light bulb of like interest and learning and experimenting with things, and then going, oh man, what if could I do something more with that, and just being open to the opportunities that came as part of my learning and hard work.
Yeah, it's funny how that's a common I think scenario where it's not like this crystal clear picture of what you are starting. It's more of kind of stumbling into it almost, right? Like, one thing leads to another, and next thing you know, you're like, oh, there could actually be something to this that I didn't even realize. I'm just trying to make a few bucks here or learn about a new technology or a new service there. That it isn't this black and white, okay, tomorrow I'm going to start this, and this is my 5-point business plan, and this is exactly what we're going to sell and produce, and this is where we'll be in a decade from now. I think that's a very common path to starting a company. And Jason, you've had a number of startups, but kind of more specifically, I guess, around your current one, which is WP Engine. How did that come to fruition? Like, did you sit down and basically come up with the plan of this is WP Engine and this is our 5 and 10-year goal, and this is how we're going to make it successful? Or was it more of a path like Corey mentioned, where you kind of, I don't know if stumble is the right word, but kind of fell into it? I don't.
Yeah, well, no one has a 10-year plan, or at least I hope not. I think I think there's always like some kind of stumbling in, but then you have to switch into something systematic, because you're right. It is a common story to hear, oh, it stumbled in because of whatever. Also, that is the common story of the failed startups. Failed startups are, oh, I saw this thing, so I made a product. Also, no one bought it. So Yes, except that's how they all start and also how they end. And so for me, it was always a stumbling in moment, but then a switch into like, well, if this is real, then you have to convert it from a project or an idea, which is typically what you stumble into. Like, oh, maybe someone needs this. Maybe someone else would want, oh, other people have asked me for that. Like that's the stumbling moment. But then the question is it a business? And the difference between a project and a business is projects is probably like a cool thing, product, et cetera, that some people think are neat, is neat. That's a project. The business is like, I know how to get customers systematically. I know how to reach them in a reasonably cheap way. I can get more and more of them. When they hit the homepage, they know in 3 seconds this is for them. So they don't just bounce off. And as they keep reading, they decide this is a pretty good idea. Then the price is right, which means price to value, price to what they can charge, for, how they buy, and so forth. Then they stay around. Hopefully, maybe they buy more. Like if these, and they tell their friends, like if these things aren't true, it's not a business, and it'll be an idea that doesn't work. And it doesn't work in terms of economically. Mm-hmm. So it has to switch from like this is a good idea, but that doesn't mean it's a business yet. So for example, in WP Engine, so I have a blog about startups and it's popular, and so I would get on Hacker News, and I would get on the front page of Hacker News, and the site would crash for the traffic. So I'd call other bloggers and say, hey, I don't care if it costs like $50 or $100 a month. It can't cost $1,000 a month, but it doesn't have to just cost $3 a month. I just need a thing to stay up when I get on Hacker News. And what do you guys use for that? And the answer was always, I don't know, but if you find it, tell me, because I need that. And so, but then I spent 4 months and I interviewed 50 people to try to figure out, is this real? What are the pain points? Are there enough people who use WordPress? Because back then there still were a ton of people that use WordPress, but still it wasn't as obvious as today, whether that's a market and whether people would pay for it or whether it's just for bloggers and they wouldn't really pay $50, because that was a lot then for WordPress hosting. And why would they do it? Like, is my case common or not common? And so after 50 interviews, I found that there were 4 things. And if you did them, everybody you ran into, at least one of them was a trigger point for them, sometimes multiple. And they were make it fast, because people needed to rank highly for SEO. And of course, if the site's faster, you get fewer bounces. Scale, that was my problem. Stay up if you get traffic. Security is always always on people's minds, even then, now even more so. And support, people would say, Rackspace's support is amazing, except they don't support WordPress. They just say the server's up. They don't answer WordPress questions, which is fine. That's not the service they make. So I need Rackspace style service, but for WordPress. And so if you did that, like $50 a month was easy to get people to say yes to. I discovered only by asking. So before I had written any code at all, I had done that. So it stumbled into something, but then systematically figured out that it was in fact an idea. Mm-hmm. I had another idea before WP Engine. It was for this marketing analytics thing. And also it was a neat product. I built a prototype and it had some cool features. And so I would show it to people. I did the same thing, interview people. And they would all say, oh yeah, this is cool. That's cool. That's the problem, is that people, of course something's cool about it. You had a cool idea. And so a lot of times an entrepreneur will hear that it's cool and kind of stop and go, see, I validated it. They said it was useful. And they don't ask questions like, will you pay $50 a month for it? Yeah. Will you pay $5,000 a month for it? Or,
those are important questions,
right? Like, or what's the competition? Like, you don't ask those questions, right? They just hear it's good and they start. So it turned out people would say, that's cool. And then what they would say next was all different. Everyone I talked to would say something else. One person thought, this is great, but what you should do is sell it to advertisers, which is actually online advertisers, kind of like bait salespeople. They sell like bait, just different. It's kind of like that. And you should charge by the impression, or I don't know, something like this. And then other people are like, oh no, this needs to be like 10 grand a month. And you sell it through big digital media agencies who are doing analytics for the customers. And someone else says, no, it should be freemium, and you give it away. And then it wasn't clear what the heck to do with it. There wasn't any, in other words, a clear business. So you got to do all that work too. Not because your idea is bad or you don't have good ideas for features, you likely do actually, but because that doesn't make it a business. And so, in each of the previous ones, I can tell different stories, but similar ones in that there was some trigger, there was some moment or an event that had an idea flash or just stumbled into it. But then there was this moment of like, oh, is this really a good idea? And figuring that out before investing the next 5 years of your life into it.
Yeah, that's also a common one I hear. I think if you ever watch shows like Shark Tank or something, a lot of the ideas or products or services they bring are they ran into a problem themselves. And then they did some research to see if anyone had solved that problem. And if not, they come out with a prototype or a business or whatever to solve that problem. And sometimes it's a great product, sometimes it's not. But just from hearing that story, I mean, it sounds like the experiences you had with your prior startups gave you the knowledge to basically do your due diligence up front for what has now become WP Engine, to make sure you don't just say, oh, I have a problem, I'll go ahead and start a company and fix this problem. You actually did your due diligence up front to make sure it was an actual problem beyond just your problem.
And to be clear,
that it was something that was
business plan. I had no business plan.
Right.
It's not that, because that's, you can't.
You did some due diligence though, and I feel like that's certainly more than I did. And it sounds like maybe even more than Corey did, which is smart. I mean, interview people, talk to people, because it sounds like you could have went one of two ways. And by all accounts, it seems like you made the right decision, because WP Engine is doing amazingly well, and you guys are growing and very successful. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. Thanks for sharing. I mean, on my front, starting Web Dev Studios, definitely I had a jump off point because I essentially moved. I left Indiana, where I was living, where I grew up, out to New Jersey to do Web Dev Studios full time. So it was definitely kind of a date set of a jump off point in terms of starting Web Dev Studios. But in terms of what we were going to do, we didn't really have that defined. It was more like, yeah, we'll just build websites. Well, what does that mean, right? Like, that could mean anything. So early on, we were very scrappy. Anything we do anything we could for money in terms of project work. Like, we didn't have a focus. Now, obviously, we are, we focus on WordPress, but back then we'd do anything, and ultimately that started narrow. The focus became a little clearer. We started focusing more on open source. And then from there, we ended up narrowing even further into WordPress exclusively. So, but that was all just kind of organically over time as we were figuring out what was working, what we were comfortable with, what people, again, were willing to pay for, what they were interested in. And I think it's important for everyone listening to remember the time frame here too. Like you mentioned, kind of WordPress wasn't as popular back then. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was purely a blogging platform, and that's all anyone saw it as back then. This is pre-custom post types. Multi-site was a separate thing. Like, this was, fairly early days of WordPress. So, and also the economy. You think about, 2008, 2009, 10. Not a great time to start a company by all accounts.
The best time.
Is it? Well, yes. I want to hear why. I mean, yeah. I guess it worked for us, right?
It's a great, I don't want to say most companies, a lot of great companies started in recessions. Yeah. I mean, one reason is because
there's a lot in the WordPress space. 2008 was a pretty magical year.
Yeah. Well, you can't necessarily get a great job. So it's a good time to maybe start your own thing. Number one. Number two, if you can do it in a recession, it's real. And when the economy comes back, you can just ride that up, because you've been doing it now for 2-3 years. You've got a little bit of, I hesitate to say infrastructure, but let's say momentum. Maybe you do have your product or agency is, not in V1 anymore. It's V2 or something of whatever it is. And now when people have the money to spend, here we go. But sort of like, if I can make it there, I can make it anywhere. Also, it's easier to get cheaper deals from other vendors. Like, for example, I mooched Office Space for free for WP Engine for like 3.5 years. Free Office Space. Why? Because they had some company had a lease on a whole floor of Office Space, and guess what? They had to lay people off. So there's extra space, and yeah, let's just have some life in here. So, there's lots of reasons why a recession is a perfectly fine time. Also, competitors that are weaker are busy dying, and that's good. That's opportunity. So.
Fair points.
Of course, it's also fine to do it in an upswing, but the point being, like, to me, those kind of things are not excuses. Like, just do it already.
Yeah, I agree. Do it.
I think the main thing I got from what you just said, Jason, is that it's real. If you can survive in the worst of times, I mean, that's a really good lesson. So when we started in 2008, and then that whole financial housing crisis happened, and we were just kind of plugging along. I didn't know any different though. And then, let's say over the last 10 years, we've had some things happen. And it's interesting because, like you said, some people are busy dying during that time too. It's a different perspective when you're starting it during and then you're going through it. But the fact that the word you said, real, that's really, really awesome. I talked to a number of entrepreneurs too, the same thing. Like for instance, they started their businesses and had their, like when they were pregnant with their first baby. And I was like, I didn't have kids until halfway through. I can't imagine, but that resiliency of starting in the toughest of times can carry us over to the best of times.
Yeah.
At least we hope so.
The other things, and this is useful for anyone starting a company, like a lot of times, one of the things a new startup is offering is something cheaper than the incumbent. Like a lot of times the incumbent company is bigger. Their prices have gone up and up. Maybe their customers are now being overserved by the product that they make and so forth. A lot of times a startup's value proposition is not, we're brand new and also twice as expensive. Usually it's we're brand new and therefore we're using the latest tech but our competitors are using 15-year-old tech. And so that's why we're twice as cheap. And that's also the open source mantra. Like that's why MySQL, like this is funny, when MySQL raised money because they were a German company and they raised actually quite a lot of money. A lot of people don't know that. But when they did, this was literally their business proposition. They said, Oracle has a $10 billion a year database business. Our goal is to shrink the whole market down to $3 billion and take $1 billion of it. In other words, we're going to disrupt the whole thing because we have this free, cheap, et cetera. But we're gonna be the owners of it because MySQL is great and everyone likes it, and we can be the #1 open source database. So that's often the case, whether it's startups or open source, that it's cheap. So in a recession, that's just useful information anyway, right? That's something a startup can often do that a big company can't come down, because then their cost structure is up there as well, so they can't lower prices. Mm-hmm. Also, they have some kind of profits that they're using for whatever, and they can't eat into that because that's very dangerous for them. So if you come in low, often the big company cannot lower prices, and you can just win that. They have no choice, which is nice because most things a big company has all these advantages over a little company. But here's the case where the little company has an advantage and the big company can't do anything about it. Therefore, it's often useful for a startup to attack in that manner. Not always. I love the big price point model, by the way, so I like that. But nevertheless, it can be a great tactic to do that. Like we're half the price or we're 10th the price, and then you couple that to the recession point. What happens in recession? Budgets get smaller, do more with less. Right. So what do I need to do? Cut costs with my vendors and go get a
cheaper service.
Yes, a cheaper thing that's a newer company, but it's cheaper. Like that. So exactly the thing that a startup can be good at in a recession is precisely what everyone's going to be looking for: magic, right? So again, it's not automatic, but it is nice to sort of point out, here's why it can be a strength to be a small company in recession. Here's why it actually can, all the wins could be in your favor potentially. So yeah.
Yeah, really good points for sure. And Corey, you mentioned something that I want to touch on too, which is the family aspect of it, right? So, starting a company is a lot of work, right? There's a certain hustle that has to be involved and a certain passion with the founders that if you're not pushing and kind of putting in the time and the work, is it going to be successful? It doesn't mean it can't be, but certainly a higher success rate if you're really grinding day in and day out, especially in the early days. And Corey, you mentioned that it'd be a struggle to do that with a family, a young family, to roll a new startup. When I started WebDev, the timing was perfect. I was single. I didn't have any kids. I was like, if there's ever a time that I'm going to be able to do this, especially leaving the state, now is the time. That was it. That was my window of opportunity, and I took it. I'd like to hear a little bit or talk a little bit about the kind of balance of, family, and even today, where we're at today, like the balance of having a family and having kids, and being able to juggle that with, being a founder and running your companies.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to, I think I was naive to, like, we've been talking about the recession, the things that were going on. And I think in many situations, that was a good thing, to be naive to it, not to worry about it. Like hearing my friends' stories that, I quit my job, started my new business, and found out like the next day we were pregnant, kind of thing sounds hard for me because I didn't have to do that at that particular time. But it shapes that. So I think it was good for me to be naive.
It's
in
serious
some ways.
motivation to make it work too, right? Like that's that.
Absolutely.
Maybe that
yeah.
little edge you need to make sure it's successful.
And yeah, so, as far as the balance situation, I always think of it as alignment, making sure my family and I are aligned with where the business is going. And because I've been where it's not, and that turned out in really bad ways where, you're aware, Brad, that I went through a divorce not halfway through, but a third way through business starting here at iThemes. But I think when I look back on my own experience, and I can only share that one, is in the early years, I was able to devote, 7 days a week, 10 hours a day if I wanted. And I like that. And it helped me. I used some of those things as an advantage, not having kids, for instance, at that time, to try to drive the business forward. And then later years when we hit takeoff and starting to, get a good, decent climb and feel stable, like Jason was saying earlier, where at first it was just starting it, and now it's like systemizing it, making processes where I can take a vacation and things. I'll just admit that at some point after that struggle in the first couple of years, it was nice maybe to take a little, okay, let's get to cruising altitude. We're kind of good. But it has freed, the way my story played out, freed me to have more time on the back end when I did have kids, to be able to go out for, be home on time with my children, to have dinner with them, be with my wife as she was, going to doctor's appointments, she was pregnant, having, when we have kids, be available for a lot more than I might not have been able to, just worrying about starting the business in the first early years. But how mine played out, I'm very thankful for it, because I said iThemes was the first little baby, and I finally got it into kindergarten where it had some adult leadership to it. And it freed me to be able to say, oh, now I've got real babies, and to be able to focus a little bit more time and energy on that. And it was really nice. It was like, I don't say it was slowing down, but it was kicking in a different gear where it felt like, okay, processes, systems, the people are in place so that I can be, have that kind of balance like you're talking about, and spend time with my kids, quality time with my kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't believe in balance at first. And you'd be really hard pressed to find someone who said, yeah, I bootstrapped a company, built products, and just was home at 5 every day, and I had lots of balance, and I didn't work all the time. Like, I'm not sure that ever exists. And if so, it's so rare that it doesn't matter. Mm. So it's just not how it goes at the beginning, period. This whole balance thing is not true. So if you're single, you can simply make that choice. And that's why a lot of people do. And that's why that is a good time to do it. And if you're not, that is okay too, but it's a pact. It's like, that's what this is going to be. That has to be okay if this is going to work, because it is not going to be balanced. It's not how it goes. But at the same time, for some people it never ends. And for others, like Corey was just saying, it can get better. Like it's great for me now at WP Engine, obviously Corey, you can decide to design the company so that it's family friendly, and that's how we're going to do it. If you're all by yourself making a product, then not yet until maybe it's more mature and throwing off money and so on. Consulting companies are different in that with a consulting company, the very first day that you have a customer, you're starting to make money. With a product company, it's not true. The very first day that you write code, you're not making money. And then the 6th month in, you're not really making money. And even like a year and a half or 2 years in, you're not making enough money. And so it is more of a time period with product companies where you're in the hole like that. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, with product companies, the idea is that maybe you can once you get out of the hole, there's a lot more leverage, meaning the amount of incremental time that you have to spend in order to get incremental dollars or incremental profit should be getting better. Whereas with if you're selling time, you can still make it better, obviously, but it's harder. It's not automatic like it might be with some product companies. But it just makes that beginning hole just that much deeper. I think if you're selling time, it can be. I mean, a lot of freelancers struggle with the feast or famine. Like, oh, it's great in these times, except it's a little lean and I'm not getting enough business. And all of a sudden you have 3 jobs at once and you're trying to figure out how to say yes to them so that you can get momentum. Mm-hmm. And then that's really hard. So I think it's just different how how an agency might start. You have those kind of problems, just a different set of problems. But either way, you're kind of all in as well, and not having balance. But you can decide to have balance later. I think though, I have a principle called you can have two things, meaning you can have two big things in your life that you're going to spend time on, and that's it, not three things. So like a thing can be family or friends or a startup or a regular job, this kind of stuff. And I mean, each one of these things takes a full-time job worth of stuff, meaning like something like 8 hours a day times 5 days a week, roughly speaking, like 40 hours a week, roughly. And so you have only 3 of those, right? Because one's sleep and other crap like going to the bathroom or whatever, right? And so that, and then you have 2 left. That's it. And so you can have a job and a family. You can have a startup and well, and that's it, I guess. But you can have a startup, maybe something else. You can't have a startup and kids you spend time with and a spouse that you really pay attention to. I don't believe that. And that's part of what causes strife, is that there isn't enough time. So at least one thing suffers, maybe all of them or all but one of them is what loses. And then by pretending like we can do it, like, but it's not true. So I think that's true. And maybe you say startup is 2 of them, but so to say like, well, I need a real job, and because I have to bring in money. Also, I have a family that I really want to spend time with, and also I'm going to do a startup. You know, you can try to, you can be doing all 3 things, but you're not doing all 3 things actually. And so I just, you know, it's easy to argue with that, and that's fine. People argue with it, but that's my opinion.
I think it's fair points. You know, go ahead, Corey.
I think when you're talking about balance, the notion of seasons of time in life and business has been much more in my face in the last couple of years. There's a season of, like you said, maybe one of the buckets is a startup season of this, season of grief and loss, season of success and happiness, season of struggle, failure, all that. And, you know, particularly personally and professionally, we've had grief in the last year. We've lost, my wife lost her brother last year. We also were potentially losing part of identity with selling the company. So, but I tried to look at it first to get through some of those as seasons of time. Okay, there's a season of time where I'm gonna have to work 100 hours a week. There's a season of time where I'm gonna have to change diapers for my kids. Thank God those seasons are over, by the way. But this notion of seasons, I think, has helped me a little bit better cope when I'm in the trough or some hard thing where I'm like, I'm posed with 3 of those things that you're talking about, and I've got to make some hard choices about that.
Yeah. Well,
can I make a hard choice to say, honey, I've got to work. I've got to go to this conference. For this season of time, but that is never, unless it's a never ending season, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I often call it a chapter. Like there's a book of your life and there are chapters, and some are good or bad or happy or sad or whatever. But then there's another chapter though, also, which is another thing to keep in mind. It's not all, even when it's bad, but then there's going to be another chapter, and that's hard to see sometimes, but true. I also think it is important to decide, what will it be? And I don't mean the 5-year plan and not that. I mean your personal and professional goals. And this is, like we said in the beginning, but this is a good example. Like Elon Musk doesn't want to spend time with his family. It's not a goal, but there is a goal of going to Mars. So there you go. But that's important to have that clarifying thing. He's not right or wrong. That's the deal. It's important to be clear. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you have a company like WildBit, which has a fantastic culture, and one where they say right on their homepage, actually, not even about us, homepage, like where customers go. And it says the number 1 thing is our people and how we interact and how we spend time with our own families and so on. Number 2 is our products. Wow, on your homepage, huh? That's honest. And it's very clear what the goals are. This is not an Elon Musk company. It's equally correct. It's not about correct, right? It's about being clear on what is it that you want to build as entrepreneurs. What are we, what's the whole point of doing all this difficult toil and everything instead of just getting a job somewhere? Hopefully part of the answer is to build the kind of life or lifestyle. And I don't mean that in a bad way, like in Silicon Valley, they say that as a bad thing. I mean like how you live, right? Your life style. to build what you want. Not on day one, because day one you don't have, there's not enough going in order to do that. But if you don't know what that is, how will you build toward it? It'll only be luck if you happen to hit whatever that is. And so you probably won't hit that thing. Like, even if the company's successful and making money, whatever, still it'll only be by chance if you make a company that you actually want to be at. And a lot of founders burn out and don't want to be at their company, whether they sell it or not, whether the company's successful or not, because they didn't figure out what would make them fulfilled and happy with where they wanted to end up from a personal perspective, not from a 5-year plan. And so never mind timelines and never mind the P&L. I just mean, like, do you want to spend time with your family? Do you want it to be a Wildbit-like company, or do you want to be a Tesla-like company? And obviously there's many dimensions, and those aren't the only two examples. They just happen to be extremes along one dimension, but obviously there's many things. What kind of a thing, what kind of a life do you actually want? And it might be that you look around and go, to be honest, I do want to, like, build the biggest company ever, go to Mars, et cetera, over family. That might be true. That might be a difficult realization, or it may be, no, I really do want both. So I would rather build a company which I'm happy at, I like who I work with, that isn't growing the fastest. It's not who's biggest, it's not who's growing the fastest, it's not who's got the most customers, it's about, did I build a lifestyle that I want, working with people who I like, being able to go home when I want, did I build that? And that's the measure of success, right? So deciding what that is, so that your decisions all along the way of, like, do you hire people? What kind of people do you hire? Who might you need to hire? What is important? What is an important metric to look at? Is it growth, or is it something else? Or maybe it's growth at first just to get it going, and then it's not, or whatever. If you don't know what the goal is, how do you know what's important to work on? How do you know what you're looking for in the people that you work with, whether that's consultants or vendors or employees eventually? How do you know? Should you raise money or not? Like, how do you answer that if you don't know what it is you're trying to achieve in the end? So I think it's very hard to know the answer to what you're trying to achieve in the end, because it means knowing a lot about yourself, which is difficult. Corey knows about himself, but most of us don't know much about about ourselves. And even Corey, I'm sure, will admit it's a lifelong journey anyway.
Absolutely.
But those are the right questions even early, or else you probably won't build a company that you actually want to be at, which to me defeats one of the main purposes of doing any of it.
Like you said, for me, when you were saying all that, for me, I had to learn those lessons the hard way, what I really wanted, which was in year like 3, 4, I was just absolutely miserable, and I couldn't believe it. For the first couple of years, I was just like on a high. I was, I'm working hard, but I love it. And then I had to get to the point where I was like, the first time, probably year 4, I think it was, I go, I don't know if I want to be here. And I had to go, hold on, put the brakes up, shift my mind and thought patterns, and go, wait a minute. And it happened to be, we had a component in the business that didn't fit with who we were and the vision that we were going toward. And I had to make a decision to go, hold on, I'm unhappy. There's something wrong here, because I got the formula you're talking about wrong. And I was like, I got to make some adjustments to this. And I did. And I vowed after that, because I made that mistake and was so absolutely miserable, probably for about 8 or 9 months. And it was like, hold on, but I'm the founder, I'm the entrepreneur, I'm in charge. I have the ability and control and freedom to switch this, even if it means this whole component leaves the business. I'm going to do it. And so from my own mistakes and miserableness, was able to say, oh, okay, I'm going to tweak my formula. Now, the other thing I would say too is, we all run into this, is the other person that goes, I don't think you should do it that way. Just because, like you said, there should be no judgment about Tesla as far as that goes. It's the way that Elon Musk or whoever's running that company wants to do it. Same with Wildbit. Is when I was starting the company, people would go, why are you building a team? And I was like, well, you're a solopreneur and you're a craftsman and you know how to do that. But first and foremost, that's how you're wired. And I support you in your business. For us, it was building a team, because I wasn't that good. I wasn't a craftsman at any one thing. I couldn't do something at a high technical level. I had to and wanted to build. And, it's just like the 3 of our models here is, will we do it the same way exactly? Probably not. But what you're, I think, getting at is that it has to be the formula of success for us. And that's how things get really sideways when we mess that formula up.
Yeah. And, it's funny, because I have a similar kind of moment 4 years into WP Engine, different circumstance, but the same kind of a thing. So at SmartBear, where I was the sole founder and bootstrapped and CEO the whole time, and I burned out. And part of that was because I was doing things that the company did need, and I was good at, but I didn't like. And that's an easy trap because you're right. It does need to happen. And you're even right. You're doing a good job. And we don't often think about, because it's touchy feeling, especially engineers don't like to think about it. Am I enjoying it? And of course you can't enjoy every day. And, when there's only one or two people at the company, sorry, everyone has to do everything. That's the deal. Right. But once SmartBear was, say, 12 people, that's not really true anymore, that everyone has to do everything. Like, that's not true at that point even. And so I burned out, even though, to your point, I had the ability not to, but I didn't have the insight not to. So I did. And at WP Engine, I learned that, and later, so at WP Engine, I didn't want to repeat that. So 4 years in, similar to your time frame that you just said, we brought on Heather Brunner as a CEO. And I made that big decision for a founder to set aside ego and control and all the other things, to not be the CEO anymore. Best decision I ever made. It was clear at the time, and now it's 5 years, or almost 5 years ago. So there's plenty of hindsight to show that was absolutely right. And everyone at WP Engine would also tell you that was right. They'll tell you they're more or less happy that I'm still here, but also very happy I'm not the CEO. And that's the point. Like, there can be so many ways. And if you can set aside ego, which is hard because we all have it. And again, I think that's part of starting a business, and really think, like, what is it that is this intersection of what I actually like to do, more or less, and I'm good at it, and the company needs it done. And if we can stay in there, all of us, all of our employees, everybody needs to stay in there as much as possible. It's it's aspirational to always be in this bullseye, obviously. But you can also tell when you're like never there, never in the bullseye. That's not good, right? And that includes the founders, and that includes the CEO. That's the part that we often miss. Also, as founders, we don't have bosses. That's part of the point. But then there's no one to tell us this stuff. There's no one like saying, "Listen, I can see this, and I'm telling you." So that's rough. That's rough because you have to be your own boss, and usually founders are bad bosses. Like, we're not good at it. So we're very hard on ourselves too, right? Like what is it like if you have the worst boss ever? What would that be like? Well, it would be someone who, every time you make the smallest mistake, they berate you and they never let you forget it. Like, years later, they'll bring up some stupid little thing that happened years ago and remind you about it, right? And when things go well, they're just like, okay, fine. Like, there's not even a lot of celebration or praise. They're just like, right? This kind of thing, that would be the worst boss ever. And that is what we do to ourselves. Mm-hmm. Like, we are the worst boss ever to ourselves. We don't let ourselves off the hook of any little thing, and we remember things we did wrong or should have done differently 3 years ago, 10 years ago in elementary school. We won't freaking forgive ourselves for whatever that is. Like, we are the worst boss ever to us, right? So yeah. we're just really shit bosses. And so it's hard to try to escape that little web and say, as I did, for example, I don't have to be the CEO. And by the way, I get to be the founder of WP Engine forever. I actually don't lose the ego component. I get to keep the ego component, but give away a lot of the responsibility. Wait a minute, that's a great idea, isn't it? As long as it's the right person and all that. Obviously, it's not as trivial as I'm making it out, but that could actually be amazing. It could be. Maybe I should try to solve for that, huh? And so now I'm not burned out. It's now 8 years in, and there you go. So, again, kind of a parallel, even in timeline to what Corey said, just different details of the circumstance, same kind of thing.
Yeah, I think
what I admire about you, Brad and Lisa, is that you guys have had probably many, many opportunities, and we've been dear friends for a long time. So I know some stories, but not all. But outside looking in for you two is that you guys are just like, what I really admire about you, both of you, is that you're just you, and you're going to run your company the way you guys want to run it. And you've had opportunities. I know you have, but you just go, we're doing it this way. And I think I really admire that because you're able to be consistent to who you guys are. And it has, I think, again, outside just your friend, thinking that has had a very positive impact on your life.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of those big moments when Lisa joined Web Dev Studios, of those big kind of defining moments for our company. And I think, to your point, a great takeaway that I got from the stories you guys just shared, which were great, is that kind of self-reflection of of yourself and of your company, and what is working and what is not working. I think that's always a hard thing to do, is look in the mirror and really openly and honestly analyze yourself and come to terms with what you're not good at or what you don't enjoy. Even if you are good at it, like that's a tough conversation to have with yourself and really come to terms with it. Right. So, going back to Lisa, like she really complimented our company and brought in a lot of skills that I was either terrible at or didn't enjoy. I mean, obviously the design component, bad at design, terrible at design, I was a back-end developer. So her coming with a design background was a huge boost to our company, and be able to bring that, but also, to your point, Jason, of we're our own worst bosses, and not necessarily having someone to kind of hold us accountable or put us in check. Having a partner is great, because that's exactly what we can do for each other, is say, whoa, Brad, like, what the hell are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. We're not doing that. Or why did you do this? Like, we can kind of call each other out and hold ourselves accountable. I absolutely respect companies that, have a single founder or a single person at the top. I think it's definitely not for me, because I like having that person to bounce ideas off of and what should we do and what works. But yeah, I think having that self-reflection with yourself, with your company, if something doesn't work, if you are super passionate about it and for some reason you're not, like, being able to step back and say, well, what is it that is causing this? Is it something on the personal side? Is it professional? Are we doing something we shouldn't be doing? Is something just not a good fit? And making some of those tough decisions and tough calls to fix it. And then, like you said, Corey, you look back and say, and Jason too, like, that was absolutely the best decision. We corrected the ship, we fixed the problem, we were able to identify it. So man, that hour went quick, and there are some amazing nuggets of information in this episode, so I'm actually excited to go back and listen to it again. But I want to appreciate you both joining and kind of being open and honest and sharing some of your experiences. I mean, I think at the end of the day, no founder is ever going to have the exact same story, the exact same path. There is no perfect formula, like you said, Jason. A lot of it's just kind of figuring out as you go, and working with smart and amazing people, most people smarter than us, right? Like, to really tell us what we should be doing and helping drive the ship. So this has been a really great episode. I appreciate you both coming on, sharing your stories. And real quick, we'll wrap it up and give you guys the opportunity to kind of let people know where they can find you online. So, Corey.
Yeah. So I have an AOL type Twitter name, Corey Miller 303. And then my personal website is CoreyMiller.com.
Awesome. Jason?
I am asmartbear.com, the blog I started at the last company, and so the name stuck.
That's awesome. So definitely check it out, iThemes.com, WPEngine.com. Amazing companies, have done a lot over the course of the last 8 to 10 years. So definitely enjoyed your friendship and just seeing all the amazing things you guys are doing. So thanks again for joining. And Lunch with Brad will be back in 2 weeks. So if it's every other Thursday at lunch, it's Lunch with Brad. Lunch with Brad. Come on, Corey. Lunch with Brad. We have a high production.
Lunch with Brad.
I paid $50 for the song I'm using. With Brad.